Hello, everyone. Welcome to GeekGirlCon's Twitch stream. That was a little awkward, but welcome to our summer wrap up with librarians. And it is our month of mythology, but we are going to be kind of talking about books and reading and libraries and all of that fun stuff as we end summer this week. I think it ends this week. Next week is September. I don't
It feels
know.
right. It feels right.
It feels like the weather is a lot cooler. My name is Marium. I am a Twitch content producer here at GeekGirlCon. My pronouns are she, her. I am wearing a light pale, I think it's like a pale cream color scarf with a black headset and glasses and a pink sweater. And I will let the librarians we have today on stream introduce themselves. So who wants to go first?
I
We can
can.
go for Oh no, after you.
Oh,
We
okay.
both took the initiative. That was great.
Hi, I'm Riley. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a library worker for SPL. Though tonight I'm here as an individual. Any of the following statements and opinions are completely my own. I'm not representing Seattle Public Libraries tonight. And I am wearing a blue and red striped top, black headset, and glasses.
Amazing. My name is Grace. I go by they, them pronouns. I am also a library worker at the Seattle Public Library. Similarly, here as an individual tonight, not with representing the organization. I have glasses on, so I was going to say tripleting, not twinning, tripleting there. I have brown hair and a headset on, and then I'm wearing like a gray long sleeve shirt with patches on it, most of which you probably can't read that well, anyways. But one does say book smeller, so I will highlight that one, and it's got books on it. So yeah,
That one sounds great. I love smelling old books and new books. Books in general.
yeah.
It's a weird thing to say, but
I
No,
found out
no, no, no.
it's like controversial in my friend group, like old book smell versus like new book smell, and I thought like old book smell was on top. I thought it didn't have any haters, but there's some strong new book contenders out there for sure.
I feel like each has its own charm depending on like what you're wanting to go for. Like new books have
Mhm.
that like excitement and like dopamine of a new book, kind of like a new reading, whereas like old is like more nostalgia and it's like, oh, like,
Mhm.
it's still preserved and it's fun to go back and reread on. But yeah, I'm starting to digress already. Um, so we're gonna start off our stream with an icebreaker, and it's a pretty, I'd say, straightforward icebreaker. What are you currently reading? And this question also is posed to our audience, and anyone watching want to talk about what they're reading as well.
Grace, you can go first this time.
Amazing. So I have a problem, a blessing and a curse, a blurse, if you will, where if a friend and the internet tells me to read something, I like won't read the premise. So I'm reading Big Swiss by Jen Egan, if that's how you say her last name, which I thought was just about cheese. For months, I was like, this book is really popular and it's definitely about cheese. Luckily, my friend was like, no, Big Swiss is a person. It's the name of like a Swedish person in the novel. And immediately I thought of Big from Sex and the City, even though I've never seen Sex and the City. But that was also inaccurate because Big Swiss is a big, like tall Swedish woman. And I was like, if I had known this was sapphic, I would have stopped pushing off my hold on it. But yeah, it's good so far. It's very messy if you like messy books, which I know a lot of us do. But yeah, I'm enjoying it.
I like I went
I'm
from like a book about cheese to a book about a big Swiss woman. Like,
Exactly. And I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't about cheese. So if it's not going to be about cheese, at least it's going to be about a potentially sapphic, I'm still, in it, Swedish woman.
Well, if you're really stuck on wanting a book about cheese, we have a whole cookbook at the library that's all cheese recipes. So you could definitely
Mm,
check that out if you wanted.
incredible.
I am currently reading a graphic novel called Ava's Demon. I believe it was a webtoon or an online comic, and now it's in like book form. and I just saw it on the shelf, and it looked really good, and it is really good. I stayed up way too late reading it a couple nights ago. And then I'm also reading Sundial by I think her name is Catriona Ward. And I actually just read her newer book is called Looking Glass Sound. I read that earlier this week and loved it so much that I started this one immediately. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish it tonight. So, like 24 hours reading, it's very good. I think it's classified as horror suspense, um, which is not typically my genre, but we will talk about that later.
So the stream is an interruption to your reading a little bit.
Mm.
No.
Well, I am currently reading Dune. I've been putting
Mm.
off watching the Dune series because I wanted to read the book first, but now I'm putting off reading the book for it because I'm so busy. But I've started it. I'm a couple chapters in. It's a great read. Very, I guess, mainstream compared to what you all are reading. I think what you all are reading is a lot more interesting, but I need to get through the book in order to watch the movie. But yeah. Um,
Yeah. I respect that though. I feel like you sometimes have to go to the bricks. Like I read Les Mis, which is also a brick. And I admire you for doing the book before the movie. I know that's something we were thinking about talking about later. But I sometimes always want to start with the book, but I lose steam really fast because I'm not like invested in any of the characters. And there's too much like lore and background, which I've heard Dune has as well. Where like the movie will give it to you really quick, and then like you're like, okay, I'm invested now. So like I'll read the giant like 900-page novel or however long it is. So I respect that you're sticking to it and trying to tough it out.
I'm trying. I think I kind of started losing hope when someone told me, "Yeah, that's not the only book. It's a series." And I'm like, "It's a series?"
Hmm.
So I'm kind of stuck with
Hmm.
it, but I'm going to try and get through it. Um, but I do also love reading webtoons and graphic novels. I think I read those a lot more than I do read actual books now, which is funny because I used to read a lot more books when I was younger. And I'm trying to remember the last graphic novel I read. I was it Dragons? We did a stream on Dragons Tea Time, Tea Dragons. I
Mm,
forgot. But it was a really cute, short, very short graphic novel. So that one was really fun to read too.
yeah, totally.
Okay, so I am going to move on to the actual reason why I've gathered you both, or Janae had gathered you both here today, is to talk about SPL's Book Bingo. So, what is SPL's Book Bingo for someone like me who's never heard of that before until I learned about the stream? And then, how does one participate? Who wants to go first?
After you, Riley.
Okay. SPL Book Bingo happens every summer, and Seattle Public Libraries partners with Seattle Arts and Lectures, and they create like a big book bingo card. There's one for adults, one for teens, and then we have a children's summer of learning that's separate. And this year we also have a Spanish book bingo card. I don't know if they've done that previously. Um, but it's like a big bingo sheet. There are 25 squares and one free square. I actually have mine so I can show it. This is what it looks like. And they have different like reading category prompts. So it could be like a prompt that's like books in translation, or a book suggested by a library worker, or something that's fantastical. And you just kind of pick a book that seems good to you and meets that prompt. And once you read it, you add it to your bingo sheet, and they are due by September 3rd this year. So if you haven't started already and you read some things this summer, you could still pick up a bingo card or print one from online and fill it out and see if you get a bingo or a blackout, which is when you get all the squares.
Thank you so much for that thorough explanation. I have had people grab it very recently and say that they're just doing it for fun, which I feel like is a great way to do it. A lot of people like it because it gets you out of your comfort zone. Because I think of myself as a really broad reader. Because I love horror, I read a ton of graphic novels, manga and manhwa, and et cetera, webcomics. So I'm like, oh, I'm already doing so much. Like there's so many, there's always something new to read. But then looking at the prompt sheet, you're like, oh wait, when was the last time I like went out of my way to read like a nonfiction novel about I think this is from a couple bingos ago, but about like sports or something. So it really does kind of mix it up, especially in the summer, when we are looking for things to do when it's hot outside.
So you all mentioned a blackout.
Mm.
What is that? And like you mentioned prizes. Do we get the sneak peek at what prizes are? Or are those like you kind of have to wait till the summer's over to know what they are?
I believe it's public information. It's like uh isn't it like a raffle to get into like the lecture series? Is that right? Because like you basically like are submitted onto that raffle by putting in your bingo list, and then you get extra entries if you do a blackout, I believe is my understanding. Is that right, Riley?
Yes. And I also want to say there are, I think that's like the grand prize. And then I think there's a
Mm,
couple other prizes. One of them, I believe, is a gift card to different local indie booksellers. Um, but yeah, I think the rest of the prizes, other than the gift card and the SAL, are kind of like secret. So I don't know what they are.
So you
and
have
then
to participate to know. That is one of the pros of participating in like why you should do book bingo
yeah.
for SPL. So you know what you win at the end, or you could win.
And then it's kind of fun too because a lot of the neighboring library systems do some sort of summer reading engagement as well. So if you wanted to be like a real overachiever, you could like do multiple or like compare categories or get book recommendations from both systems. Um, and also for your question about what a blackout is, you're probably familiar with like in traditional bingo, you can do like the lines and there's usually like the free space in the middle. A blackout doesn't typically happen in traditional bingo because the person who gets the first line wins. But in this kind of bingo, you basically fill like the entire board. So you've done like every single category possible, which is great.
So have any of you been able to get a book bingo or even a blackout this year?
Yes, I do tend to get the blackout, but I have been on a reading kick recently. And then also I do audiobooks, so it's a little bit cheating because I can like do my other hobbies at the same time. I also count a lot of like graphic novels that I'm reading if they fit the categories, so that makes it a lot easier to do the blackout. So the people who do like maybe not like Dune size books, but the people who do like traditional like page paper print reading for like every single category and get a blackout um, are extremely impressive to me. And then also really need that like extra couple days in September to get it in because that is a massive amount of books.
I have gotten my bingo. I'm really close to getting my blackout. I have two books. One of them I'm still on the wait list for, so I'm hoping that comes pretty soon. Um, but fingers crossed I can get it done before the third.
So close.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully after you finish the book that you are planning to tonight and then get those last two in. So look, sounds like both of you have read a lot of books this summer. What would be the top three books you have read or have read this summer or would recommend to others?
Um, it was hard to narrow to three for similar reasons. But I have a very easy first one, which is I read There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abduriq. And I'm obsessed with everything he's ever written, basically. He did like an author talk at the city hall, I believe, at some point in 2024. And he sounds like exactly the same as he does on his like audiobooks, which is kind of surreal when you're like, but this is like the sound I hear when I do my dishes. It shouldn't be like in front of me. But this is gonna sound so cliche, but he is like really profound. And sometimes I'll be like, again, doing like a normal chore, like folding laundry, and then he says something that I have to like go sit in the corner and think about for like the next 30 minutes. So I strongly recommend. And he's done a lot of music essays. Like he has stuff on Carly Rae Jepsen and Paramore, and I think My Chemical Romance. So you can see where my biases are there. But yeah, I love him. And then I also read Gay Theist Coming Out of My Orthodox Childhood by Lonnie Mann. If you like graphic novels about like people's coming out experiences or like growing up in how do you say, growing up in like a conservative culture, I would definitely recommend it. I know for the people who like that genre, there's like a million of those books out there, but I feel like this one kind of stood out to me both because of like the graphic novel format and like the way that Lonnie talks. So I thought that was great. And then another graphic novel rec is Messy Roots, a graphic memoir of a Wuhanese American by Laura Gao. It certainly has similar coming out things, which again, I'm usually tired of. So I'm surprised I have so many highlights this summer of that. But I think we are, like me and the author, are like of a similar age. And so her experiences in I don't know, like 2000s, like American elementary schools and middle schools were both funny and then also touching on like really heavy topics. So I loved it. Yeah.
Sounds awesome. Sounds like you had like your books thought out like really well, which ones you would want to recommend to others.
I did, but I also was like scribbling things down like James Baldwin, Silver Spoon by the person who wrote Full Metal Alchemist and like all that stuff. So there were backups. There was a lot of runner-ups.
Riley?
So like I mentioned earlier, I have gone full steam ahead into a new genre this summer. I typically am like a sci-fi fantasy romance reader. That's really typically what I stick to. I've never really liked horror that much. I scare easily, so I tend to steer clear so that I'm not like walking through my apartment in the dark getting freaked out. But this summer I kicked it off. I was looking for a short story collection, which is one of the prompts, and there was this one that it was a total cover pick. It's called Vampires in the Lemon Grove. It's got this like yellow cover with a bat on it. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool and interesting. Didn't read anything about it, just took it home with me. And I was reading it, and at the end of the first story, I was like, oh, this is like horror. Oh, I really like it. And so I ended up reading the whole thing really quickly and loved it. And that kind of like sent me over the edge. So I actually have read a ton of like horror suspense this summer, and a lot of like horror suspense graphic novels as well. So if you're looking for short stories, Vampires in Lemon Grove was really great. And then the another one was Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward, which I just finished. And I read a lot, and that was one of the most like unique mind melting books I've ever read, because the whole book I thought one thing was happening, and then like right at the end it was a whole different thing was happening, and it was very well written, very well thought out. I think the author is just I was kind of in awe of like, how does someone even write something like this? So that totally blew my mind. If you like kind of suspense things or things that like shock you or have like a really weird literary twist, I would definitely recommend that. Um, and then another one that was a total cover pickup. It was on our like new books shelf. It had just come in. Monstrio, which was I think another horror, but it was really, really good. Again, a lot different than anything else I've read. Very magical realism heavy, which is something that I loved in like high school and my early college days and haven't read a ton of since. It reminded me a lot of oh my gosh, I totally just left my brain. The author of House of Spirits,
Hmm.
Isabel Allende. The whole book just reminded me of her, and it scared me a lot. So I just loved that. If you're someone that has not read like horror suspense genre before and is looking for, some things that might still have like a fantastical or a fantasy element to it, I would definitely recommend like those three.
Yeah. I love that you started to dive into horror because A, there's like so much in front of you, you know. Horror's like that it's something you can't necessarily invite your friends into, but like it's like once you're at the same party, you're like, yes, okay, now I'll give you all my recs. And it's so interesting how like format affects it because I love horror movies and books, but horror games I can't like play them. I like watch streamers do it, because it's like the being responsible for running away part that like scares me the most and like gives me the most stress. But I've also heard people say that like um, with books, it's whatever your imagination thinks is the scariest version of like what's being described on the page, so that it can also be challenging. So it's interesting how both like the genre and the individual person like kind of influence like if you end up being okay or too freaked out to continue.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never been able to do like horror movies or horror games, even though there's so many that look really cool to me. I mean, maybe I'll give
Mm,
them another try as we head into the fall, but it was like something flipped in my brain and I was like, this is what I'm all about this summer. So I'm interested to see if that like continues as the year
mm.
goes on. But it was really enjoyable and very surprising to me throughout the whole summer.
Yeah, I feel like horror books are a lot easier to read for me as well than watching horror movies or playing horror games, only because I can put the book down and take a break and then come back to it. And like Grace
Yeah.
said, it's like very much the limitations to your imagination. So
Mm. Yeah, and like with horror movies, for instance, you can like goof around on your phone if you're scared, unless you're like in a movie theater, because that would be rude. But like horror games, you like are supposed to be looking at it the entire time, so it like really amps up the tension. So yeah, it's so
yeah.
interesting.
So I'm taking a look at chat, and Emeraldo reminded me that the book club that we did with the graphic novel is the Tea Dragon Society. That was a fun and cute little read. And then
Mm.
Emeraldo is also reading Dune, so we'll see who finishes first, if
Ooh.
it's Emerald or me. Probably
Yeah.
Emerald, because Emerald reads a lot more than I do. All right. So, okay, you all kind of already touched base on this, but like, yeah, I feel like it's kind of like a repetitive question at this point. But the next question was like, which category this year did you really like getting to explore? And for Riley, it sounded much like horror and suspense. But if there's another category or like a close runner up, feel free to talk about that one.
I read a lot. Not that I don't, I have a life, but most of my life is reading or audiobooking. I think I've read like 130 books already this year. So yes, while horror was like a big pinnacle of my summer, I also did I had one book that I really challenged myself. It sounds kind of like similar to what you're doing with Dune. Hild, which is a historical fiction, has been on my list literally since it came out, I think
Mm.
like almost 10 years ago. Um, but it's like a hefty book and it was very kind of daunting to me over the last couple of years. And then the sequel just came out and I had been hearing great things about it. So that was there's a category called One Big Book, 400 or more pages. And that was my one big book. Um, and I had just heard a lot of different things that it was like really hard to get into and stuff like that. And I thought it was like a really strict historical fiction. And I was very pleasantly surprised to find that I like actually loved it and I did not dread it at all. I got super sucked in and finished it and the sequel really quick. It reminded me a lot of Anne Boleyn and Game of Thrones without the dragons. Um,
Mm.
and I was surprised. There was a lot of kind of like sapphic romance elements that I kind of wasn't really expecting or, didn't know were in there. And then I've always struggled with nonfiction. I keep trying to make myself like it and lean into it more. And so there was one, I think it's like environmental nonfiction or something like
Mm.
that. And I love David Attenborough, and I saw that he has like a little book that's out, and it's not super long. It's called A Life on Our Planet: My Witness Statement and Vision for the Future. And I had heard really great things about it from my friend who's an environmental scientist, and I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And again, I thought it would be like really fighting through it and like forcing myself to read it to get into it. And I totally devoured it, like sitting out in the sunshine, just reading it. It was so good. And he has a really interesting view of like naturalism. And I think when I read some of those like nature themed or environmental science themed books, they can tend to get a little bit heavy or like a little bit sad. And his left on like a very positive note of like, it doesn't have to be this way. This is really what
Mm.
I believe our future could be. And coming from someone like him, it left me feeling really uplifted and wanting to be outside and like run around on the beach and stuff.
It's incredible. Yeah. Um, my category that I wanted to dive into the most this year is a little bit of a self brag because it's the body liberation category. And this was my first year kind of seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff about the book bingo. So they take, like suggestions and feedback and all that. So I suggested body liberation and I was thrilled to have made it in. And it's such a broad category, like it's like deceptively broad because people could talk about like ageism, disability, like colorism, obviously anti-fatness and all these other things, whatever body liberation means to them. Um, but I kind of had like mixed feelings about how it would go over with people. Like, would it be like confusing if they didn't know the concept of body liberation, or is it like too broad? Like, is it doing a disservice to all of those categories to like kind of put so much of it in to like one square? Um, so I enjoyed reading it for myself. I realized that even though I kind of came at it from like a more trans and anti-fatness angle, I had read a lot of those books already. Obviously, not the entire amount of books on the subjects in the world, but like enough of them that I was like, oh, what am I gonna do for like myself? So I did Against Techno Ableism by Ashley Shew. Shew. And it was a very short read, and I learned a lot about the like barriers that people face digitally, which is something I've like dived into a little bit, but obviously not read like an entire nonfiction book for in the past. Um, so that was great. And then in terms of library work, obviously I'll be, censoring like personal details and everything. But I was talking to a senior at the library and at my branch, I meant to say, and she was asking me about the body liberation square because it was like her last category on the book bingo. She was going for the blackout. And I was explaining it to her, and I was explaining how there's like all these different categories that kind of fall into it. And then she ended up getting like really emotional because she had like a personal connection to the like material damages of body image. And I really taught me to not like assume if a category would be like inaccessible to people because I, of course, as like a library worker, want to make sure that the bingo is always something that people can like understand and participate in without, without barriers. But I realized I had the assumption that like as a senior, maybe it'd be harder to for her to like grasp exactly what I was saying, and then she ended up like resonating it with it so strongly. So that was really touching. And then on a more casual note, I also liked the retelling square because I had been wanting to read Most Ardently by Gabe Cole Nova. It's Novoa. So it's kind of an interesting spelling, but it's a trans retelling of Pride and Prejudice. So it has our main character as like a Mr. Bennett instead of a Mrs. Bennett. And I had been like hoping that it was good. And when I saw that the retelling square was on this book bingo, I was like, this is perfect because even if it's not like exactly what I would want out of a Pride and Prejudice retelling, like even if it's like kind of cliche or heavy-handed, I'll still have like crossed off something on the bingo. And it is good. I think that like obviously if I was going to write my own I guess Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, you would say. I'm sure I would have taken it in like so many different directions. But it was kind of like a fun, I think that was like one of the first books that I did for summer reading. So it was kind of like a fun start. So yeah.
Okay. So we talked about what y'all enjoyed reading. And I think this is kind of like also a question we kind of already briefed over or mentioned again, because it's like questions have like very similar themes about what you're reading. But what are some books that you initially thought you might not like, but ended up pleasantly surprising you? Sorry. It took me a second to process that question. But I can say it again if you want me to.
You're good.
Okay.
So for me, I had a funny sort of cycle of opinion with Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna Marie Tendler. It's sort of define her as like the ex-wife of John Mulaney, because obviously like a whole point of divorce is not identifying people with their husbands anymore, their ex-husbands, I mean, obviously. But I have been waiting for this book like all year, and my hold finally came in this August. But of course, by the time my hold came in, I had heard that I'd gotten like a lot of bad reviews from um, the more like feminist minded side of the internet, because it was a little bit more self-centered and focused on like her own life, and it doesn't go into like her divorce with John Mulaney practically at all. So I had a lot of fear because I've read a lot of like books that people will say is a feminist masterpiece, and then you like read it and you're like, oh, actually this is like really um disturbing in some way, like maybe the character is like a little bit too selfish in a way that's not like rubbing the right way. So I was really afraid I was going to hate it, and then of course when I read it, I think those warnings really helped because I like didn't go into it expecting like messy celebrity memoir. um, and I ended up being a lot more about her time in a mental hospital, and like voluntary inpatient treatment, and then also her relationship with like the men in her life and her very famous dog Petunia. And I do like that kind of memoir where it just kind of feels like your friend is like catching you up on like the things going on in their life. So it was not the feminist masterpiece that the internet was hoping it would be like 10 years, not 10 years ago, oh my gosh, earlier this year. But like the smallest little things like just talking about like being around like a reactive dog and like how that can like affect where you go in public and things like that. I feel like people sometimes hesitate to talk about things like that. Maybe I'm just reading so many mental health books that just felt so normal to me, and it was the dog stuff that was really compelling. But yeah, I liked it.
Haley, did you want to talk about some of the books? I know you mentioned Held, that
Yeah,
historic nonfiction, but any other ones?
one of the books that I put in my borrowed from a library category is The Art Thief, and it came into the library, and I totally picked it up because of the cover, and I did kind of what Grace said, is I didn't read anything about the premise of the book before going into it, and I was just like, oh, this looks cool, I'm going to read it. And I started it and realized pretty quickly it was like a true crime narrative nonfiction, which like nonfiction in itself and then a narrative nonfiction. I was like, this was early in the summer. So I didn't have my like awakening of being more cool about nonfiction yet. And I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. So I ended up returning it, but then it kind of like stuck in my head. And I was like, well, I have to know what happens in this book. So I checked it back out and I finished it and I ended up loving it. Like no surprise there, but I was I was so like hesitant and against it, and I was gonna like DNF it and just not read it at all. And then I could not stop thinking about it like as soon as I turned it in. So that one was surprising to me, and then kind of helped me get going on my nonfiction and like crime horror start to the summer.
This is so relatable because a couple of years ago I was in a really big like podcast phase, and I hadn't read a book in like I guess I hadn't read a number of books in like, a very long time. And at some point I was like, at one point is a podcast an audiobook and is an audiobook a podcast? And at what point are they kind of interchangeable, especially the more like formal true crime podcasts that kind of just like are literally narrative nonfiction or literally like building a narrative. It's not like a goofy conversation about what's going on. Um, so yeah, I'm glad you liked it. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, if you haven't read it and you like narrative nonfiction podcasts, I definitely recommend it.
Incredible.
Well, Um, okay. So we're moving on to kind of like a different, well, this kind of plays into the, I love how you all are just answering them and playing them into the next question, like questions. It makes it so much easier. But what are some of your preferred mediums of consuming stories, like audiobook, physical, ebook, and why?
I feel like, yeah, I have covered this one a bit, but Riley, if you want to take it away, I can jump from there.
This is such a weird question for me because I feel I read so much and I read in so many different formats, and I feel like I have these really weird rules in my own head for like around how I will read certain things. Like I read a lot of ebooks if they're like romance or fantasy, but then if it's a sci-fi book, I only want the physical book. And the same for like graphic
Mhm.
novels. I really want the physical book of a graphic novel, mostly because I can't see very well and I want to hold it like as close to my face as possible. But then I audiobook a ton. I I drive, unfortunately, and I don't, I'm not in an area that's commutable. So I end up commuting to work a lot. And then I have a puppy that is new to our family this year that I take on really long walks. And so I listen to a lot of audiobooks that way. Um, and I've come across some really stunning audiobooks. And I will say for audiobooks, like the narrator really makes or breaks it. I've had
Mhm.
books that I was like, I'm done with this book. I hate this book. I'm not going to finish it because the narrator I just wasn't vibing with. And I've had books where I thought I would not like it or not enjoy the story. And then the narrator totally drew me in. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, audiobooks are really as you said, dependent on the narrator. I love, I know it's like a bigger budget, but I love that there's like multiple POV chapters, like if they switch between like let's say two sides of a romantic interest chapter to chapter. It's nice when it's a different narrator, because on audiobooks, especially if you listen to them at like a little increased speed, it can be so hard to tell like when that switch happens, and then you're like with the same narrator, you're like suddenly we're seeing like we're like on the enemy side of the war, and like I don't really understand, did the character like betray someone, but of course it's just like a different person entirely. So fully cost audiobooks are nice. I also, as I've mentioned before, think that sometimes authors do a really amazing job. I don't have the author name memorized, but I know a really popular nonfiction book is Breeding Sweetgrass, and that book is like phenomenal with the author narrating it. Um, and I will say one thing with audiobooks is that you can get a lot deeper in while hating it. It's a lot more compelling to DNF a book if it's like a physical book, both because you can do like the and like, you know, yeet it, but also because with audiobooks it just kind of keeps like passively happening to you. And sometimes if I'm doing like with my like hands or whatever, doing like a really intensive craft, or I'm like getting really into my Animal Crossing village or something, I kind of want the book to be like slightly bad so that I can like kind of like pop in and out and still kind of know what's going on. So if there's like a romance book that I know a lot of people like, but I'm not sure if I like it, I'll like do that. You can get into trouble with that too, because I had that with the Golden Enclaves, which is Naomi Novak, I think, is the author, where I kind of was like listening to it casually, not really paying attention to any of the lore. And then halfway through the book, I was like, wait, this is like one of the best trilogies ever written. And I have no idea what's going on because I've just been like too laissez-faire, however you say that, about paying attention during the early portions. So it's interesting that how that happens. And then my final note on format is there's a couple books that I've like done weird stuff where like I've gotten the ebook because it was like the fastest thing I could possibly check out, or I just could not wait to jump into the next one. And then like because I work in a library, it's so easy to just put a hold on the physical copy as well. And I've done the thing where like I read the physical book in the daytime and then the ebook at night when I like want to turn most of the lights off. And it is kind of terrible because it's like I have to like refine my place every time. So I can't say I recommend it, but you can live that life if you want to.
I will also say if there's anyone that is interested in like maybe getting into audiobooks, and you're kind of not vibing with the very traditional, just like talking ones, there are a lot of them that are coming out now that have like sound effects or like a
Mm,
full cast. I know there's I think it's like graphic audio that's doing it has like full sound effects, full cast, like there will be like fighting happening and you can hear like a sword clash in the background. So that's kind of an interesting
yeah.
like emerging trend that I've been seeing lately. If anyone was looking for a slightly more engaging version.
And I feel like it really depends on your mood too. Like there are times where I think I'm ready to listen to an audiobook, and then I actually start like reflecting on my day. And at that point, it's like, okay, time to like listen to Fleetwood Mac or Boy Genius instead of like
Yeah.
an audiobook. Like I clearly need to process something rather than listening to someone say words. But ultimately, like physical books are the same way, where like you get stuck on a page forever because you keep on getting like distracted by literally anything. So yeah,
We all know the feeling of having to reread a page a couple of times.
brutal. It's so brutal.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I tend to zone in and out and like if I'm like I like to listen to them when I'm doing something, so I often find
Mm,
myself having to like go back like 10 seconds. Oh, shoot, or like 2 minutes. Like oh, I completely missed the whole thing and I don't know what they're talking about. So,
mm-hmm.
yeah, I can understand like how audiobooks could be a little tricky in that too. If you're just playing them in the background and then you just kind of zone out and zone back in, and it's all of a sudden there's something random happening, and you're like, how did this happen? How did we get here?
Mm-hmm. It's tough too because like there's so many podcasts where it doesn't matter. Like the McElroys, for instance, if they're just like talking and making jokes, I can miss the jokes. Like it's gonna be okay. But then if you're listening to like a D&D podcast where they're like crafting a story, yeah, it's where you actually do need to like comprehend that information. Or if it's like true crime and you're like, oh wait, they actually caught the murder and I was like not paying attention. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, a lot of times when I'm like listening or reading, I tend to like to visualize, and that's how I
Mm.
get drawn into reading books and all listening to podcasts and stories and narratives. So it kind of brings us me to the next question is when you read, do you visualize the story or do you just see words in your head?
I just visualize, yeah. I think it's possibly a combination, but it feels more like visualization, yeah. But it's cool how it still like trips me out that the human brain can be so different that there's like just text. Yeah. What about y'all?
Yeah, I'm a big visualizer. I think I visualize a lot. Even when I'm audiobooking, I feel like I worked in a different library system before where I was like down in the basement stickering books and like shelving things in this like kind of spooky area, and I would go down there and I was like totally visualizing this other thing, just like putting stickers on books. um I think that's one of the most fun parts is like how the world unfolds in your own head. And it's really interesting because everyone has like such different visualizations. Like my friend and I read the same book, and even though we had the same description, we pictured the main character like completely differently. So I think that's like a
Hmm.
really fun part of it too.
Then how would you feel about like graphic novels? Because like graphic novels are interesting because they have kind of like a merging of those two, but it's kind of they help you visualize the characters and the background and the environment and the scenes a little differently than like a pure text would.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah.
I don't know. That's
Uh,
really interesting. Um, I think it adds like such a big element, and you're still just getting like a couple pictures per page or so, and I feel like I can still sometimes visualize like if it'll be like the next day, I feel like I can kind of think of like, oh, what did they do? Or, things like that.
I have a really big like art background. Like I was an art kid in high school. So like the visuals for me are like obviously a big part of the draw. And I love how fast you can read because the visuals are already there. Obviously, if it's like really intricate, you might like take longer because you're like looking super closely at everything. But for instance, with like manga, if I'm gonna read like a shonen, I care about like fighting like 50% and then also don't care about it 50%. So like I can just like really zoom through an entire fight scene and not know not like ignore the parts that I'm not interested in while still having like a visual comprehension of like what's happening versus like if it was a novel fight scene and I was using that same level of speed, I'm sure that I would be like mentally putting legs in places that like don't the kicks in places that wouldn't make sense and stuff like that. So it is really nice. And obviously when you're doing like writing, people will tell you like show versus tell is like one of the number one tips for writers. And in graphic novels, you're able to like say that a lot more. Like if the character is like kind of like alt, like goth in some way, that's like really easy. Or and if you just say like a character is goth on the pages of a novel, it can come off a little bit like forced rather than it like seeming natural, you know? So I feel like, yeah, definitely pros and cons to both. But yeah, and then of course, when you read a lot of graphic novels, like it sounds like we all do, and you're reading or listening to a more traditional book, I feel like that experience can sometimes like help you because I'll like be able to put in like mental placeholders of like what something might look like based on, you know, something that I've read that had the visual component.
So, well, we're kind of talking about visual components. I'm gonna jump over to visual adaptations. And so and I know we kind of talked about this when we were talking about Dune, but if a book has a visual adaptation, such as like a movie or a TV show, do you generally try to read the book first, or do you just decide I'm not gonna ever touch the book, or do you decide to like go back to the book later after watching the show? How do you like balance that, or how do you decide like book, TV show, which comes first?
I can start this one. I did kind of go into this obviously at the beginning because I was like, yes, this is such an accurate thing to say. But I kind of sometimes need the movie or TV show to be invested. There's plenty of times where that's not been the case. Like for instance, I read Delicious in Dungeon before like the anime came out and was like completely enthralled. But I read like Six of Crows before the I forget what the earlier trilogy is called, Shadow and Bone. And part of that was because people had told me that Six of Crows is better written because the author was like more experienced and like was better at character development and things like that. So Six of Crows kind of got me hooked on like the lore of the series, and then I was able to read the trilogy. And even when I saw the bad writing or like didn't like certain characters as much, I would be like, no, I'm still in it. Like I'm hooked. And then like, classics like Dune, it's so hard because to use Les Mis as an example again, um, in the book, there's like I don't know. I'm gonna exaggerate and say like it was like 100 pages about like a random priest. And if you're reading that for like the first time, you're like, is this relevant? Is this the main character? Because sometimes it is a main character and you just like don't know yet. But because I'd like seen the movie from like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, immediately my brain was able to be like, oh, it's the priest. Yeah, he's like not important, but like we're gonna vibe with him for a bit. And that's part of like the fun torture that I've like inflicted upon myself by reading this book. So but yeah, I also, you know, I think at this point in life, I feel like it's really normal to like not stick yourself to like a firm mantra of like I will never, you know, watch the movie first or I will never read the book first. So yeah.
Riley,
Feel
any
like if it's
thoughts?
I tend to read the book first a lot of the time. Like I said, I'm like a very visual person. Like I have one of my favorite books I've read like way too many times. I actually like bought the audiobook and play it like at night if I
Mm,
can't sleep. And I feel like for that one, I have such an intricate world built in my head and I can like see every part of it. And if there was ever media about that book, I don't know if I could watch it because I don't want to like lose that. And I don't know if this is the same for other people because you know our brains are all so different. But
mm-hmm.
once I see like the visual media for like a book or something, I feel like I can never draw that initial picture that I had back. Like that
Yeah.
happened with the Hunger Games when I was in like high school, I think, where I had read all the books and I had such like vivid visualizations of like all the characters and the settings. And then as soon as I watched the movies, I like couldn't bring those back. The same with like Twilight. The
Yeah.
movies totally ruined that series. Well, I don't know that that series was ever the best anyway, but yeah, I really like being able to kind of keep that in my head. Um, and I think if I watched the movie first, I would just go into it with like, this is what this character looks like, this is what this house looks like. And I think it's kind of
Mhm.
fun to like get to make up your own.
Yeah, that's true. My example is Good Omens because I thought that this could be literally disproven in the novel. Sometimes you just don't read carefully, but I thought that like Crowley was like kind of the short and stout one, and then Azrael the angel was like the tall and lean one. And then of course, literally everybody that I talked to about the book and obviously the TV show had the complete opposite perspective on those two characters. So yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna ask like two more questions kind of round up our conversation. So, the first question is, do you have any tips for someone who's trying to get into the habit of reading?
I'll start with the I feel like you should be really indulgent if you're trying to get into the habit of reading. It reminds me of other sort of habit building tips where you just want to find the thing that you're going to be like inherently drawn to rather than trying to force what you think you should be doing. So obviously that could be like a prior favorite. I know a lot of people kind of get back into reading that way. But if you don't have a prior favorite, you can even think about like what was the last thing that like you were really excited about, like a TV show that you like stayed up, did the whole just one more episode song and dance, and like what was it about that compelled you in that way? Was it like the tropes in it? If it was fictional, was it the content? If it was like more of like a docu series or something? And there's going to be somebody out there who's written a book with a similar vibe. And especially when you're new to reading again or reading for the first time, it can be hard to like find it. But that's what libraries are for. We have lots of ways to help with that. So yeah.
Very similar to what to Grace's advice is I would say definitely pick something that like really interests you or draws you in. Start really slow. And if you're, if it's not great and you're not enjoying it, like it's totally fine to ditch it. You don't have to force yourself to like read things that you're not enjoying. I think that makes reading feel more like a chore instead of like a fun activity, like watching TV or something like that
Hmm.
would be. Um, I actually had not read anything like the whole time I was in college and got kind of back into it a little bit before COVID, but a lot during COVID, because I joined like a virtual online book club. And I would definitely recommend that, or like look and see if there's like a Discord channel or,
Hmm.
if there's like other people you can connect with about something. Because if like you're talking about it with other people, it makes it more fun to like, oh, I have to get to that chapter because I want to be able to talk to this person about it. And then definitely like trying different formats, like try an audiobook or try a graphic novel, try short story collection. I think those are pretty like a lot more approachable than some other things. Like if you just want to sit down and read for like 10 minutes, you could read like a quick short story. And I definitely think over time it kind of builds up and you'll kind of gain like a little bit more stamina for it. Um,
Hmm.
it reminds me a lot of kind of like exercising. Like if I went to the pool, like the first day I've ever gone swimming, I could probably swim for like 20 minutes. But then over the course of like, if I went all year, it could be like an hour. And it's the same with reading. Like you just start low, start at like 10 minutes a day and just build up from there and pick something that really excites you because then you'll really look forward to it. And
Yeah.
take advantage of library workers or bookish people in your life. We love to talk
Hmm.
about books and we would love to recommend them to you.
I want to also quickly add that the publishing industry like changes. It still has a lot of flaws. There are still certain things that are like hard to get published and especially hard for them to invest money in the marketing of. But when I was in a huge reading slump for years, similarly, it was because I never actually stopped reading. I was just reading like queer manga, queer graphic novels, and like fan fiction, of course. So it's like I was doing a lot of reading. I just didn't think reading. I just didn't think that the publishing industry had anything that was like going to be good, where the lesbians don't die at the end or whatever the horrible representation is. And then of course when I like peeked back out of my reading slump, I was like, oh, it turns out like a trillion books that are like the exact kind of thing I'm already reading in these other formats are out there. So sometimes it's nice to kind of like peek your head above water and take a look at what's changed. I know the romance genre especially has like gotten a lot more progressive is maybe not a consistent word in the romance genre, but it's like expanded to a lot more tropes that you would not have seen published a long time ago. So yeah.
Um, Also, speaking of taking advantage of librarians and libraries, my last question I want to pose to both of you is what is a resource or service in the library or service that the library provides that people might not know about and that you would like just want to kind of do a quick shout out or talk about?
Going off of our last question, I really want to shout out, it's called Your Next Five Books program. It's on the Seattle Public Library's website, which is just spl.org. And you do like, it's just done online. You do a quick like chit chat with a librarian and kind of tell them like what books you've enjoyed or what TV shows you've enjoyed. Or you could say, I want calm fantasy, and they will send you a list of the next five books that they think you'll enjoy. And you can do that a couple of times. You could read a couple things and like let them know, like go back in later and do it again. And I think if you're wanting to get into reading, you could be really specific, like I want short stories or graphic novels. And not a lot of people know about that. And it's a really great service. We have some really great librarians and info staff out there that run that program. And then explore your libraries, explore the online resources and the in-branch resources. Our public libraries, especially here in Washington State and in Seattle, are really incredible. We have a lot of super great programs and programming that I don't necessarily know if people know about or think about. And there's so many really cool libraries all over the city, all over King County, Pierce County, um, like look and see what's near you if you're out on a walk or if you have an afternoon where you're like in a neighborhood waiting for an appointment or something and you need to kill a little bit of time, like look and see if there's a library nearby, and there probably is. And each branch is so different and unique, and you might find like your new favorite place or your new favorite book or an online resource that you didn't know you could be like using and taking advantage of.
I will also say that, yes, definitely take advantage of being by so many great systems. You can have multiple library cards. You're literally allowed to do that. And if you like the like museum pass or discovery pass that SBL has, where you can go into a museum for free or rent a discovery pass for free, so you can like explore national parks or statewide parks. They have those at a lot of the surrounding systems. You can kind of like look at the wait list for either and kind of game. It's like you're not really gaming the system because this is like what libraries want you to do, but like you can really enjoy things a lot easier. I also, it's not SBL, but KCLS got Rosetta Stone recently. And as I'm sure you know, that's like a very expensive language learning software slash app. So um, stuff like that you wouldn't know about unless you kind of just like poked around to see what's out there. So yeah, I think there's a lot of cool stuff.
Well, thank you, Grace and Riley, so much for all the information and like all like the book recommendations and for your insight into Seattle libraries, Washington libraries, just reading in general and books. It's like it's great to talk to people who are very excited about reading. It makes like me excited to go back to Dune and finish it. So I am like definitely after this, I am like ready to go back and open up Dune and finish a couple hundred pages. We'll see if I can by the end of this week. Maybe not, but fingers crossed. Um, and I think it is 8 o'clock, so I am going to wrap up the stream. I was waiting to see if anyone had any questions for you in chat, but doesn't seem like it. So I'm going to hop over and let everyone know that next month we is September, and we are actually our theme for September is GGC ABCs, which is kind of like back to school, back to the basics. Next week, we will be playing Valheim, a game that we've already played at least twice. Um, I'll be back on stream playing Valheim along with Julia and Prime. Maybe Christina is going to join us. But am excited to see everyone back then. And also Grace and Riley, you all are both welcome to watch us play too if you're interested. If you want something in the background that's not maybe an audiobook or a podcast, but us just kind of screaming frantically around me, not knowing what I'm doing. Oh, the usual. um,
Yeah.
but there's that. And then I don't see, let's see if we're reading anyone. So we aren't reading anyone tonight, but I think that's it. Any final words you want to say to chat or to stream, or final goodbyes before we hop off?
Yeah, thank you for having us. And I like everything else in life, reading and enjoying stories is not a comparison game. Let yourself fluctuate between your hobbies, your interests, and it's healthy to um, have other things in your life besides reading. So yeah, thanks so much for having us. It's been
Yeah.
great.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me just geek out about books and talk about summer reading and all the great programs we have here. And I hope everyone finds a story or a medium that they enjoy and can connect with, and just have fun with it.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for willingly, like, volunteeringly, like, participate and answer all my like questions and just geeking about books in general.
of course.
Um yeah, so we're just gonna say goodbye to chat and then we're gonna just hop off. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Have a good night.